Good morning and welcome to Sunday Coffee. Joining, as usual, my co-host, the future governor of Virginia, TK Eppley. Today, we're going to be talking about, well, he doesn't even know yet. So as par for the course, we'll just surprise him. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Ford, and this is Echelon.
Guess who's back?
Good morning, TK.
Good morning, fine sir. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm drinking some nice, lovely Marriott coffee.
Yummy.
Yeah. So, all right. So the first thing I'm going to hit you up with this morning is your, I'll at least say, colleague, Dan Crenshaw. He's got to go in for a surgery. Evidently, like when he got his, why he was an eye patch, he only has half of one eye still.
Right.
Now he is going to be blind for like another, like the surgery, they have to do something. He's basically out of commission for a month, not be able to see.
I read that yesterday, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just kind of like, that personality, because like, okay, you as a congressperson, I can only imagine that basically for the most part, it's got to be frustrating for someone that was a high performer because nothing moves fast. No,
I've had other friends of mine that were that were special operators, Army, Navy, that was their big problem. Hey, even oh my goodness, what's his name? He was a senator from Virginia while he was a Marine, was a Secretary of the Navy for Reagan, then became a Democrat. He got out. He basically did his time in the Senate and was like, nothing ever happens. Right. So yeah, there's no expediency.
Yeah. So I wonder how, okay. So, if you had to today be basically said, you're not going to do anything for a month and you're not going to be able to see for a month, because I think that's the way I read it.
That's the way I read it as well. I don't understand completely the surgery that he's having done. But if you've only got one good eye, whatever they tell you to do, you're going to do to try to restore the sight in that eye.
Why would he not, or why, maybe it's not even available, but you're hearing all this stuff about stem cell research in Panama and what they're doing and the amount of people that are coming back with like, hey, I had a torn rotator cuff and now all of a sudden I don't need surgery. You think it would work with the eye?
I have no idea. There's a lot of great places. Even there's places here in the U.S. that are doing unbelievable work with stem cells, and how both. And I think some of the interesting work. There's a firm in Texas that's, one of the things that we do when we talk about TBI is can you use stem cells to reach those parts of the brain that get affected by either some sort of trauma to the brain. The big part, as I understand it before, is having been told this by some of the folks that work at one of these places, is that you couldn't break the blood-brain barrier, right? That was one of the things that they were having trouble getting the stem cells there. But then they figured out how to separate the exosome from the rest of the stem cell, which is what was needed. And now they can do it an IV drip, and it's experimental and things like that. But, I don't know to the extent when you start talking about retinal issues, because that's part of the problem, is like his retina is only partially attached. And this is from what I read the other day. And that certain things they're going to do are to relieve the tension on what's remaining from his retina. Right. And so I don't know. I would imagine, because I hear about all these different stem cell therapies now for things that we never thought of before, not least of which are orthopedic issues. And there's been extensive research done, and quite a few former special ops guys have, just because they want to be pain free and they're willing to try something other than drugs, is that they're willing to go there, and they've had some very promising results with that. But I certainly feel for Dan, but I would imagine that even if he's got to be face down and he can't see, he's going to be listening to the news. He'll be commenting on it. You might not see it out in public as much. But I think kind of looking at his role, like as I see it, now is I think he's gone from, fairly junior member of Congress to conservative crusader. Right. I mean, and he has, and I think if you look at most times when you get somebody who becomes a crusader, especially on the conservative side, the left has a real easy time punching them in the face, so to speak, and getting after them for all things that are external to what they're saying. Right. We don't, in politics today, in my view, is we traditionally don't fight. We don't answer questions. We don't fight back with, hey, our policy is this and it's better than your policy. If you come out and say, hey, we disagree with you, we're going to attack the underpinnings of the ground you stand on, right? And it has just little to do with politics. They tried it once with him and it was like, no. And it's, the old joke, it's like, are you going to try to fight a guy with an eye patch?
Okay.
Right? And I think I know him loosely. I've met him a few times. I'm not friends with Dan, to the extent where I'm friends with other people in the SEAL community. But I think he's a very considered individual who takes somewhat of the SEAL ethos into Congress with him in a way that some others haven't. And he truly wants to help the people of at first the Texas second, and then certainly out into helping America, right? And he believes that there's a certain course that needs to be charted. And the thing I like about him is he gets on, and it started out he was doing it to explain it to his district, but now it's the nation. Every time there's a bill that comes up that is, he comes up and says, here's what is being said in public about the legislation. Here's what the legislation actually says, and here's why I voted the way I did. And if you want to talk about a great way to use social media when you're an elected official, it's getting back to that compact that the people we put in Congress are not our leaders, they're our representatives. And I think we've forgotten that as a nation. They're like, hey, they're not in charge of us. They're supposed to be there to exercise the will of that district. And I think he does a good job of trying to articulate why he does what he does to his district, but by extension to the nation, right? And I think I appreciate that, right? And like I said, I never met him before he was in office or anything like that. Obviously, I'd heard his story, but it's very, it's a very compelling story, and I think we need right and left, right? We need more people like that aren't afraid to stand up and say, here's why I made the decision I made. And I think he'll be back. I don't think this keeps unless something tragically goes wrong, but I don't see him. I don't, just like most of my friends, most of the folks I know, that things like physically you can hurt me, but you're not bringing me down.
Yeah. So one of the things about so I like at least what everything that Dan typically says. There's a couple of things I don't necessarily agree with him on, but which is fine. I at least appreciate that he's his opinion, but he's on the healthcare committee now,
right?
And he's he definitely has a platform that many other politicians don't have, just because he's on the Joe Rogan show like all the time. It seems
right.
Like every other episode, either he's on Joe Rogan's show or Jocko or someone like that. But Dan's on there, and he was mentioning on the last time, which I've been reading about a lot of what Dan says. He says, look, there's a lot of things that we all agree to, but we don't agree to in terms of like, we agree to the what, we don't agree to the how.
Right.
Healthcare being one of them. And he said that, look, I absolutely believe that every American should have healthcare. Like, you should have it. Like, we are by far the best healthcare in the world. We make all of the medicine. Like,
right.
So here it is. But I don't agree with Bernie Sanders' plan. Bernie Sanders will cripple us, and it will make it to where our top doctors, we will no longer have them. Like, we will basically say, hey, you're a neurosurgeon, you're a top neurosurgeon, but you're only going to get $100 for fixing that person's stroke because that's what we're negotiating.
Right.
Like, why would someone go be a neurosurgeon at that point?
That's a big problem. Like in England with the national healthcare system, as soon as, because you can go to medical school for free, but as soon as their obligation to the National Health Service is completed, it's kind of coincidental. I have a friend of mine from when I lived there. His brother is an ophthalmologist. And as soon as he was done his time in England, he's now an ophthalmologist in Florida. Right. Well, yeah. And I agree with Dan as well. And I think we've gotten to the point where
the aspect of the general practitioner aspect is a good idea to focus on and let that kind of be that everyone has access, so to speak, equal access to that. Because I think that's the most important thing. That's kind of like your head coach for the rest of your medical stuff is that general practitioner. And he said the big issue that we have in the United States is that most people don't have a general practitioner. When they're sick, they just go to the hospital. So you never have this medical record where someone's constantly looking at it and going, hey, you've got these other issues. And I thought that was interesting.
Not only is it that you don't curate the lifetime medical of a human, which I think is hugely important. Like here's your medical history from day one till whenever. You also, especially in poor communities, they're using an ambulance as a taxi to the hospital, and then they're entering through the emergency room and it's the most expensive way to dole out basic general health care, right? Wellness care, as it were. And usually by the time that folks end up in the back of an ambulance, they're way past wellness. Right. I mean, that's just, it's a sad fact. Right. And it's one of those things that, like, as a human, if it doesn't bother you, then we're probably not going to be able to be friends. Right. Because you see people, and I would tell people, everybody, to spend some time in the back of an ambulance. And it doesn't have to be your life's work, but everybody can go.
Wait, as a patient or as like an observer? I just want to be clear.
No, I'm thinking I think everybody should work in the food service industry or the service industry for a little bit, because you become better at dealing with what is a very adverse human condition of entitlement, right? And I think,
as a certified food handler, I agree with that statement.
Well, as in most localities now, the city, I know in Virginia Beach, is a massive and very professionalized volunteer EMT paramedic force, and they're fantastic. And the city will pay for you to go to paramedic. Right? The city will pay for you to go to EMT. But take a month, go to EMT school, take it 6 weeks at night, whatever you have to do. Go to EMT school and volunteer and get in the back of an ambulance for a while, and do it in a big major city, right? Get out of an ambulance and have a lady that you think is 60 who's actually 35 look at you when you ask her what her chief complaint is, and she says, I'm in pain. And you say, where, ma'am? And she says, from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet. Right? And that's just, they've never been for wellness care. Right? And we don't have enough time for me to go off on this subject, right? Because
so I'll dovetail you into, like, this theme of today was healthcare, because you've been posting at least quite recently about some of the elderly care that's going on, and
elder abuse,
and I wonder how that might wind up connecting into the healthcare aspect, because I wonder, at least to me in my mind, is that where I'm drawing this connection to is, well, at a certain point in time, like with elder abuse, you also have the people that the government winds up appointing if they can't find like a person to worry about your estate. And
no, it doesn't. No, okay, so that's where things go wrong, right? So in the case that I'm most familiar with, you have an heir to a fairly large fortune who is mentally sharp as a tack, and she's getting older, right? She's in her age. She was in her 80s, and she was getting older, and she wanted to have quicker access to some of the doctors, right? And even though she's stupidly wealthy, at some point you just can't. The system is what the system is, and there's workarounds created. So there's this, in air quotes, elderly healthcare system, which was not an elderly healthcare system at all, that says, hey, we have access to these doctors. We'll get you seen, and then we'll get you into the system. Well, getting them seen meant the minute they showed up, they get declared incompetent, and then they want to try to appoint a conservator and a guardian ad litem to them, right? And then it becomes a legal battle of a corrupt, in my mind, in many people's mind, a corrupt probate system where judges and lawyers that have known each other since they were kids, effectively, in some cases multi-generational, have affected a scheme where they can literally take away every dime from somebody, and then, ostensibly you do that, you leave them to die, right? And it's very hard when you've got the entire legal system of an area that is geared towards taking care of each other, and the things get pushed back and things slow roll. And then when they don't just get to rape and pillage the system, that person's personal wealth or family wealth, in this case, then they start getting nasty and playing dirty, right? Because a lot of them have no discernible clients other than what they do for this, and they just want to go charging up bills, right? And the guardians and the conservators, they get paid to pay bills, and they get a fee for all that, and it's incredibly. I mean, there's 30 to 50 cases now that are out in the public eye of effectively just leaving people to die, right? And it's it's like anything else. You want to. There's two groups of people that really need to be taken care of: the young, infants, toddlers, people that can't take care of themselves on the early end, and then when it turns around, people that can't take care of themselves on the elder end when they're elderly.
Yeah, we call that the widows and orphans rule. Okay, right. And so that it's a reverse bell curve, whereas in this case the level of care is 0 at the top, and 100% down here, and the age is 0. And so you get this curve going like this. So when you're basically at about 25, 26, you basically get like nothing, and you should be able to take care of everything. And then as you start going back down, getting older, then the level of care.
And the thing is, you look at, statistically, I think we spend like a third or more than a third of our healthcare budget that, individuals and everything is taken in the last few years of your life, right? And we do whatever we can do to keep people alive for as long as we can, right? And
should we?
I don't have the answer to that, right? If you tell me it's my mother or my father, I'm going to say yes, right? Emotionally at first.
Right. So,
and that's an emotional response, right? Because it's your mom and dad.
Choice. Should we be able to make that choice as sovereign individuals of ourselves? Should I get to choose when I
think you should be able to make that choice.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people do with DNRs and all the other things, all the other legal mechanisms where you can say, hey, if I go into distress, please don't attend to me, right? And that's backed up. I mean, we can talk about the Kevorkian method, right, of assisted suicide, but at the very end, I don't want you to keep me alive. And I'll tell you, I watched my father pass away from emphysema, and I wish it could have been quicker, but he would not. He was the guy I'm not going to submit to any heroic measures or anything like that. And it just took that much longer for him to give out because he's a stubborn old dude, right? And I'm going to be a stubborn old dude one of these days. And
what do you mean one of?
I was waiting, Dan. That's why I had to pause there. I was like, come on, dude, get after it. But through a close friend of mine and somebody that I want to do everything I can do to help. It's not just, it's not just the elderly. The elderly that are usually get involved in what is one of the worst scams on planet Earth. They, if they pass away at some point, it takes the stress off them, and you watch people deteriorate very quickly. But what I've seen is the family members around them deteriorate really quickly as well, because when a person, when one of these elderly folks passes away, the game doesn't stop, right? The game doesn't stop until they can extract as much money from that account, right? That family's generational wealth, as it were, in this case. It doesn't stop until they have everything. And you see children that are in their 30s and 40s that the adverse health effects are insane, right? To the point where I get mad, right? I mean, I don't get mad very often, like where I get like I want to go out and harm people anymore. This is, to me, one of the most abusive things that can happen to any family, and it's being slow rolled, right there in how we prosecute it, how we look at it, and how we deal with it. And if a family doesn't have great wealth or excessive means, it's hard to fight, right?
Sure.
Because they'll get your house, they'll sell all your belongings in your house, to include get rid of your pictures and everything. They'll take your life away from you. And especially if that elderly person is still alive, you start saying, hey, you've got no more photos, you got anything, you lost everything. And next thing you know, that person is going downhill at a much faster rate than they might. And it's great to see that some folks have stepped up and said, hey, I don't want what happened to my loved one to happen to any more loved ones, and I want the people to pay, right, that are involved, right? And it's a slippery slope, and it's hard in any given region because, when you look at any system, there's people that have done business together for long periods of time. And the probate system is nothing like the criminal system, right? It's a very collegial group of people. If you ever want to know what, kind of the art of this scam, watch the Netflix movie called I Care a Lot.
It was a really good movie overall. Even though they put some humor-like things in there, but the underlying is very true. I wonder how long.
It's scary.
So I'm going to go back to the DNR for now. Do you or would you have a DNR?
I always have, yeah.
So I'm just curious, how does that conflict with your main part of who you have been as never being out of the fight with your ethos?
No, I don't think it does at all. But there's
like, I can see if you're like brain dead, right? Because that brain activity.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's measures. Like, hey, I have had heart procedures because I had Galley AFib, and I don't have it for that. I'm like, hey, do what you got to do to get the ticker started again, because they're working on the ticker, right? Yeah. But I'm in a car accident. My biggest fear is that I'd be a burden to society, right? Where I'm non-functional, right? I look at, it's one of those things where the amount of love and respect I have for families, especially parents of service members who their kids weren't married or anything. They don't have that next generation of family, and a lot of it is blast trauma. That's closed wound blast trauma, and it basically the function of that human being is not, they're not the same human being, and a lot of times they can't take care of themselves, they can't wash themselves, they can't do all the basic things that are needed. And you're watching amazing people who once again, your kids grow up, they move out of the house, you expect great things for them, and then they end up back living with them, and their biggest fear is that now they're going to pass away, and that child's not going to be, an adult child is not going to be able to be taken care of, right? So when I say, we talk about DNRs and things like that, is for me, I don't want to be that guy, right? I never, that to me is a fate worse than anything, where you're, let's put it this way. I helped more so. My mom passed away pretty quickly, but I helped with my father for probably 4 or 5 years. And I was very fortunate that my mom talked him into moving up from Florida to Virginia Beach to be around the grandkids, because when things went south, he was about 5 miles away from where I live. And watching him fade away was tragic to me as a son, right? But if in reality, like when I look at it as a rational adult and remove myself from that's my dad, I go back and say, I wish he would have passed away sooner because of the distress he was in because of the emphysema. Right now, he will tell you it's his fault because he smoked 3 to 4 packs of cigarettes a day most of his adult life. Right? He wasn't one of these people who was blaming it on the world. Was he angry? Absolutely, because he was a great thinker. He was a great engineering computer mind. And then as the lack of oxygen, he started to get forgetful and everything like that. And he would say that every day it was like breathing through one of those little drinking cocktail straws. Every breath he took was like getting through a little cocktail straw, right? And it gets me worked up now. To watch that happen was terrible. I can't imagine as a parent now, if one of my kids as a child, I can't imagine reversing that and putting that on my parents, right? Or, to me, that's the, or having, if I didn't have kids and all that stuff, but then to turn it around and put it on your family, that's a very difficult thing for me to say is okay. Right. And I applaud everybody in the military medical system that saves these lives. Right. It's things, it's the whole reason the whole MASH system started in Korea, because of the getting people from the battlefield to live was a very low percentage in World War II. Right. And that's why you see guys that got shot up in World War II and lived and had long lives. It was kind of an amazing thing because there was only so much that could be done. Right. And then Korea came along, we had the MASH system. Then it was further refined for Vietnam, and everything, it's gotten better and better. What people don't realize is much like the space program, there are a lot of things that we have on Earth now that were byproducts of the space program. Byproducts of the MASH system and mobile hospitaling in the military have really given unbelievably quick advance to saving lives in the back of an ambulance in the country, right? Those get transferred out to the emergency medical system very quickly, to the point where, and I might be off a percentage, but it's over 95%. If you got to one of the military surgical facilities, if you made it alive to one of those facilities, you were going to live, right? With 90, some things are just out of, they're out of a physician's control, but you were not going to die, right? Now, would I submit that in some cases, some of those folks they probably some days wish they were dead, right? And I'm not a big ghoul about that, but I think of it now, like you get to a point where, what's your quality of life, right? I'll take it one step further. How many people keep pets alive, right? And keep getting drug therapies and keep spending an exorbitant amount of money to keep a pet alive when the pet is most likely in distress? And who are you keeping the pet alive for? Now, it's not a direct comparison, but like for me, in a kind of in a argumentative sense, it's like, hey, at some point, if I get to be that, out of it physically, mentally, all those things, and it becomes somebody's full-time job just to make sure I can go to the bathroom, I don't want to be here. Everything in my body says it's not fair to whomever is in my life at that time to have to do that. It just doesn't make sense to me. And that's where I come from, right? It's not spiritual. It's more of, for me, I think as a practical thing where I don't want to be that guy. Right. And it would every day make me sit there and literally cry because I would want to do that. Right. And I think there's a lot of my friends that have passed away over the years, and every day I wish they were there because they have amazing kids. They have amazing widows that are doing amazing things, and they should all be doing that together. Right. And, but they laid a foundation, and those kids that where they've moved on and they're doing great things. Do they ever forget? No. Right. But by the same token, I've had a couple of friends who blast trauma. Everyone is divorced, and you know, there's one in particular where just the other day I was asking about him, and nobody knows what's happened to him. We knew that he had, you know, he was married, had a great family, had 4 kids, great career going. His wife is amazing, and pretty sizable blast trauma. It decelerated very quickly, his cognitive ability. And they got divorced, and like now nobody knows where he's at. Right. And I mean, this isn't like some random dude that we don't know. I mean, it's like everybody's like, yeah, well, oh man, I haven't thought about him in a while. I wonder where he's at. Well, you know, I know where he's not at. He's not at home with his kids and former wife, because it got to be too big of it was too big of a thing. Right. And what does he wish? I don't know. Right. But I'm telling you what I would wish.
Yeah.
Right. Is I wouldn't be that person, because I'll tell you what, I know his family, and I guarantee you the hardest thing that ever happened, and probably still weighs on everybody and his ex-wife's mind and everything, is his state of being. Right. Whether they're married or not. I mean, she's a good human being. Right. And it's not like she's just going to, all right, I'm glad I'm done that. Right. And I wasn't around for all, you know, every daily discussion of it, but that has to be, those are things that, you know, when we confer the Medal of Honor and we do everything, everybody looks at the front end, you know, the shiny side of the car, right? Nobody looks when the oil leaks and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, this engine's falling apart. Why is that? Well, hey, look, we just waxed the outside of the car. It's got to be great. All right? No, it's not. And that's, to me, is when we start talking about orders not to resuscitate and things like that. It is, you know, I can't, like I said, I can't speak for anybody else, but I can't imagine that there are folks right now that are in a mostly incapacitated state that wish they weren't, one way or the other. Right. I mean, like either, you know, we in New England, there's always a great saying that, you know, some of the older Irish guys used to use was, you know, when they say goodbye, it's like, I'll see you on this side or the other. Right. And I don't know what that's going to be.
Yeah. You know, I've been thinking about it quite a bit, just because of my parents getting older and older. And I wonder, you know, in some ways, because I'm not in a very close geographical presence to them. And so, as you know, reading some of the posts that was happening after watching that movie, and I just kind of go, you know, I wonder, especially because, you know, my mom, being her husband having passed away, you know, almost 2 years ago now, and is, you know, even though my aunt and uncle are close by, but I go, how easy could it be for someone to come in and basically just do that to her?
Oh, hugely easy, right? Because who do most criminals prey on? They don't prey on you and me.
Yeah. Huh.
Right. I mean, I get the call about my car warranty every day of the week, right? But they don't prey on us. They prey on 18 to 22-year-olds with credit card, you know, that kind of thing. They eliminate debt, plus student debt, blah, blah, blah. And it's it's largely just a ploy to get your social security number so they can start to do bad things. And then they prey on the elderly. Right. Once people can't think clearly. And again, here's the biggest thing. Like my father would say all the time, I don't want to be a burden to you guys. Right. And it was this constant battle to reassure him that he wasn't. Right. And this, again, this goes back to, you know, where I grew up, what I did for a living thing. Like I have a pathological problem with bullies. Right. And anybody that knows me well, you know, I do. Like you want to be a bully? Fine. Let's go outside and talk about it. Pick on somebody your own size. Right. And it's all it is. It's like, hey, I'm taking advantage of somebody who is in a capacitive state where they can't make a great decision. That, and if you look in this generation right now, largely a generation, especially, you know, seniors, that they're not great computer users, not great users of technology. And it's so easy to craft correspondence to them that looks legitimate.
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, and hey, by the way, while we're on it, to go off on a complete rant, one of the reasons we can't have nice things with technology in government in a lot of these places, because a good portion of the Senate was around when Lincoln was alive. Right. And you've got,
look like a junior guy.
I am. Yeah. Compared to them, you know, and you've got people that are in their 80s that are still wanting to make decisions for the U.S. Right. And they keep getting elected. Right. Like, get away, move. Next generation of representatives. Right. And what type of job are you doing? You know, and although, hey,
well, it's kind of like that Eddie Murphy movie. I don't know if you ever saw it. I think it was Eddie Murphy, at least, where basically he goes to Congress, and he goes to Congress because the original senator died, and he has the same name as him. So he goes on to the ticket, and people are like, "Hey, who did we vote for last year? Oh, we voted for Jefferson."
Right.
It was. Oh, all of a sudden,
and the system's set up for an incumbent to win.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, but you look at, how, and these are folks, especially when you start talking about a United States senator, that have a whole staff around them of young people to protect them from that. And most likely, they're not getting on any kind of email, computer, smartphone on a general basis, even if it's just for the sole purpose of not accidentally hitting send and having something out in the public domain that they don't want to be out there. But here's the thing: why isn't the Senate in particular? The Senate shades demonstrably older than the House. Why aren't these senior citizen senators out here every day of the week advocating for better senior care?
I don't know. My initial thought,
because nobody's paying them to.
Right. Well, because there's no money in it. They know that they're taken care of regardless. They, when people enter Congress, they typically aren't millionaires, but by the time they're ready to leave, they all are. Right. And they have some of the best health care for life. Right. So to them, like, there's no money in it. So
right. But I mean, the question was largely rhetorical, but you would imagine that, you're going to try to help your peer group out.
You would think you'd be trying, if you're an elected official, you're representing, not just your people, but especially, you're supposed to be trying to do what's also best for this country.
Right. Well, I think that ship sailed a long time ago.
Yeah. And we just keep voting for the same people over and over again. So it's just it's one of those things that certainly bother me. And you go back to that bullying aspect, having been a someone that was bullied quite a lot growing up, which is why now I probably have an aggressive stance for when it happening, and probably a large reason why I could have practiced martial arts and done a lot of fighting for in terms of that type of combat sports for a while. So why I was so aggressive and wanting to pursue that so vehemently, and why I'm a big believer in it. And a special shout out to my daughter, who just got her yellow belt.
Yay!
Yep, she did quite well. Doing karate, so they got to see that virtual ceremony.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's I think that's a big way in which you can kind of prevent bullying pretty quickly. I can't wait to get her into. I wish there was judo around. Like, this judo's just not as popular.
Well, I think lately, and I don't disagree with it. Why isn't it? I think that BJJ.
Yeah, so I like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu quite a bit. The and what I'm seeing with some of the schools that are coming up is that they actually do bring in some judo into it.
Right.
The big like, if you just take the two disciplines, judo, you start kind of basically standing up, like wrestling, and then you're learning all these things to get them to the ground to eventually do that. But you're not fighting from your back; you're fighting, so to speak, on
Right.
the goal, and then to do those things. Whereas Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu assumes you got taken down, and now how are you going to defend yourself?
Right. Well, that's part of the rise of mixed martial arts, right?
Yeah.
Is that whole thing. I mean, I was just looking at, because one of my poster children for "You Need to Go Home" is Patrick Leahy, who's the senior senator from Vermont. And he's 81 years old. And he's been a senator since 75.
1975?
Yes.
The year I was born.
Yeah, he was the first elected to the Senate in November of 74 was when he got elected.
So he's been in public office longer than the president.
Yeah.
By a couple of years, right? So
yeah.
Probably just due to election cycles. I thought Biden was 78. I thought it was 78, but I don't know.
Well, some of it is some of it is less about their raw age and who was sitting in office when, in this case, he turned 30. Right? I mean, he was 34 when he got elected. And he's been there ever since.
Wow. When did the president first become? He's got way too much stuff in his bio here. It makes it a little bit difficult. Let's see. Oh no, 73. So he was before.
But again, I think that comes down to who was sitting in office before. Who was sitting in office beforehand. In this case, if there was another Democrat occupying that seat, he's not going to. They're not always wanting to. I'm also looking at Dianne Feinstein.
Oh, well, just her. Basically, all of them from California can just can go. They're all been around. This is why I really wish there were term. I want term limits for the Supreme Court as well. I think the Supreme Court should be a little bit longer. But I think if we should have term limits for, we have it for the president, definitely should have it for the Senate, definitely should have it for the House, and I think you should have it for the Supreme Court as well. I mean, I would probably say Supreme Court should maybe be 20 years, because isn't 20 years would be considered 2 generations?
I'm less concerned about that being a lifetime appointment than I am the move right now that Biden is floating and desensitizing a largely ignorant American populace about packing the court. I mean, if FDR couldn't get it done during the Depression and World War II, we probably need to leave it alone.
Well, I think I don't think he does it. I think he knows. I mean, I just don't think he does it. I think it would be very, very bad. If he, you're talking about regardless of which side of the aisle you want to sit on.
Right.
Which, or I think as Chris Rock says, which gang you want to represent.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I think him doing that would polarize, 50, half this country to a point where it would further the divide. I mean, here's the thing: at a certain point in time, the opportunity for the Supreme Court to swing back is there. You're gonna have Breyer likely retire within Joe Biden's term here, and so they'll be replaced back with a more liberal. But in a lot of the decisions that the Supreme Court has been making recently haven't been like there's been some 5-4 decisions, but there's also been some like 8-1 decisions.
Right, and that's what's hopeful, right? That here's the thing. I think, I mean, people get worked up when you put a Republican in office and they vote or you put a conservative in office and they vote for they want to seat more conservative jurists. Likewise, when people put, like, what do you expect? People, it's not, you're asking a compass not to point north.
Yeah,
right?
all these,
but that's happened the entirety of the existence of the court. It just happens that now we view those swings between left and right to be that pendulum swings much more wildly than it has in the past.
Absolutely. So, you take this recent Supreme Court decision, which was 5-4, because saying that California is overstepping again when it comes to putting overburdensome restrictions on religious activities.
Right.
Because they say, hey, if you've got more than 3 families, you can't do it. But then you go, but what about a restaurant? What about a doctor's office? What about this? What about this? What about this? What about this?
Right.
So, you're just trying to make it to where religious people can't meet and congregate, and that's wrong. And I agree with that decision, that the Supreme Court was right into overturning that.
Right.
And that is where I think is a big problem, that they're taking, many people are taking out of context what the decision has to do with. And, everything needs to be treated in a consistent manner. And I believe that for everything. Everyone should be treated with decency. Everyone should have an opportunity for success. It doesn't mean that you're going to be successful, which is really big reason why I do not like this whole, I like diversity inclusion. I don't like when we add the E to it. I believe at that point people are trying to say, we need an equal outcome, and I'm not a fan of that.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Do you want equal opportunity or you want equal outcome? Right. Because you can't. It's one or the other.
Yeah, I look at my my MBA cohort, and when people just say, because they were big and they wanted to have this whole equity conversations, and I'm like, well, I want to be the number 1 person in the class. How come I didn't get it?
Right.
Well, you did. So the thing is, well, you didn't earn it, and neither did some of these other people, right? So I had equal opportunity to be the valedictorian of the class, if I so chose to.
Right.
And I'll be honest, I did not want that, because I needed to be able to do other things in my life. The knowledge was more important to me, and how to, in order to get those things, but it was not worth what I was going to trade off to be. I wasn't willing to make those trade-offs.
And how do I say this? I totally agree with that. And even if you look at undergrad and everything like that, right? There's in academia, there's this big importance, because nothing's important, everything's a big deal, right? Largely in college, even like the school my daughter goes, everybody shows up, they go to class, they do their homework, they're not, they turn their assignments in on time, and everything is working, right? And it's the 4.0 mentality. 4.0 mentality is important to a university. It's not important to employers, right? And the average GPA of a billionaire is about 2.97. Right? I mean, why? Because they were busy thinking of other things, right? They were imagining greatness in a way. They were getting the information, they were absorbing it, and they were doing what they needed to do to pass, because they understood the value of the information. But more importantly, they understood the value of time management and the 80-20 rule.
Well, absolutely. And I think, Bo, if you were to take a look at that GPA aspect, the subjects that they were interested in, probably got A's in. It was, and they focused effort on what they felt was important.
Right.
So for me, like the classes I did very well in my MBA were the ones that I had a very keen interest in getting there. Strategic marketing, being an example. That was something that I wanted to understand the science behind marketing, because it's completely changed now that we're in this digital world from what it used to be in print. And there's so much data involved, and I wanted to understand all of it. And I got to tell you, from that class and even what I've had to put into practice, recently with the distillery, it is insane how much data is easily available for a very low cost.
Oh yeah, and people all the time, it's like, oh, we got to go out and do this. Go buy the data.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're entering, most people are entering an industry that already exists, and where people are wildly successful in that industry, and you want to be another entrant into that industry, I think what great wealthy people do is they look what works and they copy it and they make it better. Right? That's the kind of the model. I mean, you've got your Elon Musks and you've got everything, but good Bart feels like, hey, we're making a better mousetrap.
Well, unless anyone does not know or forget, Elon Musk did not start Tesla. He bought Tesla.
He bought it, right?
A lot of people don't know that. Not that it was, I mean, I personally still think it was a bad investment on his case, but he's made quite a bit of money off the stock. There's no rational person would buy the stock based on their financials. You're talking about getting caught up in your feelings. Yeah, buying Tesla stock is getting caught up on your feelings.
Yeah. Hey, people do things in their feels all day long, right?
Well, that's largely why I believe you're going to become the next governor of Virginia. I've already got Stoney on board. He's already
great. Now I have.
Look, he's already committed to writing your name in. That's done. It's all. It starts with one.
That's perfect. That's exactly what I need. I'm looking at the list of senators right now. Just we were talking about it, and there's not. I mean, it's funny because like we look now, like 1997. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but those people are, they're on their way to 30 years in office.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. 1994. Right. And there's a couple. There's like one of the new senators from Georgia is 34 years old. He does 30 years. He's barely getting ready to get a retirement check. Right.
Yeah.
That to me is what's, they make $175,000 a year. What's the attraction? Right. I mean, I'm saying that rhetorically. Right. Because we've now said your lawmakers, your leaders, you're not our representatives, and we don't hold them accountable like representatives. And we've let them both on, House and thing talk it into that it's magic in the forest what they do. The other thing I think that's really kind of some subtle subterfuge with the system is the amount of time as a district, these guys are coming back to their districts, right? And it's, you're almost required to be in your district every weekend. Number one, think about how much expense that costs, right? Just to have people fly back to their districts all the time. And, but more importantly, how many days are you not in the district legislating? I mean, are you not in your seat in Washington legislating, right? And when you have district offices, when you have DC offices, I'm thinking all those staffs can coordinate with each other and there's outreach. If you sent, do I want to understand that my elected officials are in the district? Yes. I want them to understand what goes on. Do I think they have to be here every weekend to put on this, this veneer and this, this show that, oh, I'm with the district and everything like that? Yeah. I mean, my congressman, I don't even know. I mean, I don't see things about her in the news being in the district or anything like that. She may very well be, but it's not well advertised.
Well, she's likely not making it her platform, right? And because she's not looking to be the next reality TV star. And I think that's what a lot of them are doing. Like,
my personal opinion is she's a placeholder for a vote. Like, and I think that there are certain people that run for elective office. You're right, because they want to be a star and they want to be out in the public domain. There are certain people that are pushed to run for office because the party leadership says this is a solid vote and this is somebody that we can. Here's the marionette piece we need them to play. And I think AOC falls into that, right? Is she has a role to play, right? And she plays it very well. And and then there's other people that are just, they have their head down. They're writing legislation. They're, whether you like what they write or not, they're the folks, that are down there kind of nuts and bolts guts on the committees, making things happen. And they get staffers that are like-minded.
Yeah.
Right. You've lived in the DC area long enough to understand the arbitrage of staffs. Right. And moving people from one staff to another to get the right mix of elected official and hand-holding backbone.
It's quite a bit. I mean, people just think, well, hey, we've got this senator that got paid for, so they're making their $175,000, but they forget about all of the staff that's also making a lot of good money.
The staffs, very few of the staffers make big money. They can go and eat and they can have a lifestyle and everything like that, but you don't get rich being a staffer.
Well,
you get rich afterwards.
Yeah. Well,
right?
They certainly are privy to a lot of the inside information.
No doubt. Right. Well, and it's access, right? I mean, that's even if you do one term as a congressman, you still have lifetime access to the floor of the House.
Yeah.
Right. Which is where, when you look at, as they try to restrict lobbying and other things, part of that is due to the fact that you, for the rest of your life, have access to that room.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We only have a couple of senators now who were elected in the 70s.
Dying.
Well, I know. Yeah, no doubt. But or they, like Biden, they went and became the vice president and stuff. They've done other things, but we have a large contingent of folks that were in the 90s and now 2000-ish, right? Which is, I think that's, some people are like, oh, it's just 2000. It's like yesterday. No, they've been there for 20 years. That's their third term senators already, right? And I mean, and it's both sides of the aisle. It's not, you've got Chuck Grassley, you've got Inhofe that are just, long-seated Republicans. And, I think before we start saying one of the foundations of the Constitution, which is a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court, is what was the intent of the framers with regards to representation, right? And was it intended to be a lifelong profession, or were we meant to send people who were high-minded? Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. There were high-minded individuals that wanted to represent their district and the folks that lived there in a way that best benefited the people of the country.
I imagine that they truly thought they were just going to be representatives of those people because they all had professions.
I imagine the same thing. I do. They were all, and if you go back to
time, other than the president and the vice president or a governor, I don't believe they felt that the rest of them, that was their full-time job.
But even presidencies, like who was it? Taft. I think it was Taft. He was the president. Then he became a Supreme Court justice, right? It wasn't, the primacy of the presidency wasn't what it was until probably Teddy Roosevelt, started to elevate the presidency into this national bully pulpit guy. And certainly I think Wilson did a lot to damage that. And then certainly, how we looked at the presidency demonstrably changed with Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Right. And then even
more so with Kennedy.
Well, I think, yes, it goes into things. So you had this, this larger than life figure at the time in Roosevelt that shepherded us through a very hard period. Now, people can argue whether his policies extended, delayed, or anything, but it's kind of hard to say that the Great Depression was extended once World War II started. You know what I mean? Like in my mind, there's a lot of things that that kind of jumble up a clean thing. But at the time, there's people that, in the 60s that were like, that's the only president they ever knew. Right. And all of a sudden, before Kennedy, I was like, well, okay, we know Eisenhower too, right? Because they lumped them all in the same thing. But you looked into, I think, Eisenhower largely a great laissez-faire president in a time of big industrial, big global expansion of the U.S. on the world stage. And then Kennedy said, no, we're going to change. We're going to dream. We're going to do these following things, right? And if you look at John Kennedy, I think today he gets painted with the brush of his brothers, right? Where Robert Kennedy was an ardent crusader, right? And a vehement believer, right? And then Ted Kennedy was, as people say, a liberal lion, right? And John Kennedy was neither of those, right? I think he had a vision about what America could be, but he was a fiscal conservative, ardent anti-communist, right? He was an anti-abortionist, right? And some people say, oh, it's because he's Catholic or whatever, but he had a vision of America and America's primacy that was based on a financial, military, and in certain terms, using the space program as the vanguard of saying, from a technology standpoint, here's who America is and here's who we can be to the world. And giving that new generation something to think about that was bigger than themselves. And that was at the beginning of the 60s. And look, by the end of the 60s, it was executed. Now, here's the interesting question I always say about the space program. If Kennedy had lived, let's say he had done 2 terms, right? He'd have been out of office in 68 or January 69. Would they have made it to the moon when they did? Would they have taken the risks with Apollos 9 and 10 to get to 11? To meet the deadline of 1969.
I think so.
That's the interesting thing to me, right? Is could he have driven that bus?
The only thing that might have changed would be, would we have actually gone to war, a proxy war in Cuba? Like we almost did.
I actually think that had he stayed president, we would not have gotten as involved in Vietnam as we did. Because I think he was very skeptical of that. Right? And I think he was skeptical of the benefit of the, domino theory of the time. I think I don't think that it was as important to him as it became to the people around him.
Yeah. Probably.
Right. And I think that's a bigger thing. And I think he also was he was not an advocate of massive government expansion either. Right. And here's the thing. I mean, do you know what got him really interested in the civil rights movement?
I do not.
2 things. One, he read Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King, and then watching them not let African-American students into public schools and public universities in the Deep South. That's what he's like, okay, we have to do better than that. And he, much like every one of his predecessors, was very hands-off. Right? Eisenhower tried with the Civil Rights Act in 1957, got shot down like a low-flying duck in Congress. But when you think that's really where the kind of the tipping point for, hey, how we're going to address this in the nation. Had he lived, what primacy would that have taken? Right. Those to me, I think that was a very pivotal time in the U.S. Right. And who we got and why. Right. And I think to a certain extent, he scared the Republicans because, he was an ardent, you couldn't get him being soft on communism. You couldn't get him there. Right. And he was somewhat of a wild card that in that. And I think, I those are the things I wonder, like when somebody of great merit passes away, in any industry or anything, like what didn't happen, or what would have what was in the works. I mean, would people have been would the folks, whether it's North American Aviation, NASA, everybody else, would everybody that was part of that be singular of focus on one date because they wanted to live up to the ideals of a president whose life was cut short, and you didn't have time to view in full totality, right? There's people that look at Reagan and go, he was all this and all that. And then they go, yeah, but after 8 years, it was degraded to this, right? And so you have a full story or a full narrative. I think in anything in life, when somebody's life is cut short, what was the narrative the day they died, right? And the narrative the day he died was Camelot, and here's what I'm doing. And then so you didn't get to the point where he was having to have gutter fights, right? Which is what the point he was entering to try to get reelected, right? Was trying to have gutter fights with other politicians to get an agenda through Congress. I mean, because who the biggest opponent of manned spaceflight was in the Senate at the time? Walter Mondale. He thought that it was a complete waste of money and we should all put it to social programs. And in fact, when Apollo 1 blew up on the pad, he was vehement in his desire to shut the space program down. And it was a young astronaut named Frank Borman. Actually, Tom Hanks did a great thing on From Earth to the Moon. He basically reenacted that scene in the Senate when they drag everybody in from North American Aviation to NASA and everything like that. Right. And you've heard me speak in public before. One of the things I always talk about is most failure in life happens not because we were malfeasant of intent or had stupid people or didn't think, right? We couldn't imagine an adverse outcome, so we proceeded as if one couldn't happen. And Apollo 1 was no more than a stark example of that. They had all sorts of procedures for what happened if they had a fire in space. They didn't have one for what happened if it was on the pad, because they never imagined it could happen, right? And that was the problem. And everybody's moving at the speed of light towards this goal of getting a man on the moon by 1969, right? And so when they were in Congress, or when they were in the Senate and hearing, they finally, they started the first question of Frank Borman. He's like, do you trust North American Aviation? Yes. Do you trust NASA? Yes. Okay, whose fault is it? He goes, it's my fault. It's their fault. It's our fault. It's your fault, because we never imagined that outcome, right? And I think that is, being in business is like what I think a CEO or a leader of any kind, whether it's the president of the United States or the leader of a small company, your job is risk mitigation. And most of the risk mitigation revolves around finding out and assessing and imagining things that nobody else is imagining that could adversely affect outcome.
Yeah, sure.
And I hope it doesn't ever get as tragic as what happened to Apollo 1, right? Because we lost 3 great astronauts that day, right? And that, like when I think of Kennedy and I think of times in history like that, I always think, okay, what happens in 1933 if there's video of a man in a wheelchair, he doesn't get elected to be the president, right? What happens if the press was not complicit in keeping that from the American people? Can you imagine that today? Like all of a sudden the guy's missing a leg and he can't hear in one ear, but we're not gonna tell anybody because we don't want him to appear weak, and we're gonna put him in positions to be successful, right?
It wouldn't happen today because everyone's got a camera.
I understand that, but what happens today that we aren't hearing about, right? Because everybody has a bias of some sort, right? And how do my biases affect what I want, how I express outcome?
Well, And that's a big part of what the press is not doing, or at least being transparent about it. Like, look, I got no issues with a particular news source being left, right, center, whatever, but be honest about that.
Don't advertise yourself as something else.
Right? Be honest about that aspect. So I understand. So not just me, because I believe I do understand based on the way they talk, but that the general public would then understand that this is the way you want things to be. Bias is, it's very difficult to remove a bias because
Right.
we all have them. It's very difficult to keep those things in check. And that's because, it's based on our own learned experiences. And that's difficult to remove that. Why do people act a certain way? Well, because that's how they've grown up, and that's what they've known for 30, 40, however many years. And so they're going to look at things that way versus like someone that grew up in Alabama is going to look at things much differently than the person that grew up in Wisconsin. They're not going to look at things the same way,
Right.
One doesn't know too many days of 100 degrees, and the other one doesn't know too many days at negative 20.
It's funny because I always say, like, one of the easiest ways to express what goes on and where people are from is from their driving habits, right? And I learned how to drive in the suburbs of Boston, and it's a much different driving style than learning how to drive in Mississippi, for example, right? Or any rural area. Go pick somewhere rural, right? It's one of the problems we have with traffic sometimes in the Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads area is because of the large amount of Navy we have here and government employees. We get people from all 50 states, right? And you have that expression of like what your experience is. And I think when you start, if you go back and say, hey, now when you look at the cancel culture and everything like that, cancel culture is driven around by like, oh, this is different from me. I don't want to hear this, right? And I think that you're using folks are more likely to use the news for affirmation instead of information.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There.
And if they hear something that's out of the norm, no, I got to go back to what I believe. I have a belief system, and in anything, right? And I want to have that affirmed because my opinions of value, my opinions of merit, where I think you and we were like, hey, I want somebody to come in and tell me I'm all effed up and then explain why. And then we'll work back to a middle ground and go, okay, yeah, I can be in here. And it doesn't mean that you don't have integrity. It doesn't mean that you don't stand up for what you believe in. What it means is that you have the intestinal courage to go, I'm not right all the time. Right. And I can't be right. It's not a thing. And there's this great belief that that within what I believe to be quote, what we call the cancel culture today, that, hey, I only want to hear folks that agree with me. Well, I can't, I don't, I want to hear dissent, as much as possible, especially if you're running a business, right? Don't hire people that agree with you, right? Hire people that have the same desire to be wildly successful as you and to be diligent and do everything else. But I want to create an environment where there's dissent. And we've talked about this before. And this is that concept of when you're a leader, walk in the room and talk last. You go to meetings, there's, in the Zoom meeting, here's the topic. I can walk in and go, all right, what do you got? Because as a leader, when you start talking, you become what I call the human starting gun.
Yep.
Right? You've already outlined your opinion. Now everybody is predisposed to want to cheerlead for that opinion. I don't want that. I want one guy to go, are you effing kidding me? Like, did you bump your head on the way in when you were thinking of this idea?
Absolutely.
And here's why. Yep. Right? Yeah, I don't want dissent without explanation is just complaining. Right? I want somebody to come in and go, I really thought about this, and I think where we're making a mistake is this. And I think you're causing the mistake if you do it. Right? And however that looks at. And as a leader, if you can't handle that, go home. Because you're not a leader. You're a boss.
Yep, absolutely. Well, my friend, I've got to get on the road.
Drive safe.
Yep. All right, everyone.
I got basketball right after this.
Yep. As always, thank you.
And thank you.
Everyone else. Have a great week.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.